Once upon a time, in the village of Dingley Dell, there lived a bookmaker named Totalmeyer. For Totalmeyer, every day was exactly the same. He'd eat the same meal, walk the same path, work on writing the same book he'd never finish, and talk to absolutely no one, which was exactly how he liked it. That was until Frogbert. What? Of course this is a crafting video. Okay, yes, fine, I'll get to the crafting. This is Goblin Girl Studio. Now, in order to make him, the first thing we need to know about the bookmaker Totalmeyer is what he looks like, which is always kinda like he'd rather spontaneously combust than interact with you for more than 30 seconds. He's got a squat little face and a squat little body and always dresses like he needs to be ready for a surprise business meeting that might jump out at him at any moment. In spite of his interests, routines, and personality, Totalmeyer thinks of himself as a fun guy and likes to wear silly ties to demonstrate that belief. However, wary that anyone might find him too fun, he wears mostly browns and greens to keep his palette nice and neutral. Despite Totalmeyer insisting that this is not an accurate description of what he looks like, let's just move on to Chapter 1, the head sculpt. I start out with this head mount that just kind of appeared on my desk, then perform kind of a reverse dissection, impaling a tinfoil brain onto the mount, squishing 2 toad eye-sized beads into the foil, then wrapping the whole thing in a layer of super sculpty skin. I free his eyes from their clay prisons, then try to just focus on the general shapes of his face and not get too sucked into the details. I got sucked into the details. And this is when I thought I should just double check that Totalmeyer and Frogbert's heads are the same size. They weren't! So I cut off 15% of the clay and basically started the whole sculpt over again. But this did give me an opportunity to try out another idea that I've been toying with. So I give these critters replaceable heads and faces so that I can rip off their heads and horrify children, but also so that I can change out their expressions. But something that I've noticed about the 3-dimensional nature of these critters' snouts is that they kind of have different expressions from different angles. For example, friendly, serial killer. So I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could intentionally exploit this to get 2 different expressions out of one head sculpt? Because I'd love to make this toad look like he just read your manuscript and thinks it's trash, but also make him able to gaze longingly at a certain frog without having to sculpt 2 different heads. Let's see if I can fit both love and hate into one face at the same time. So to do this, I'm trying to take advantage of the way the mouth wraps around the shape of the head. I'm making his mouth turn downward into a grumpy frown and have the most downturned part of his expression be right at the apex where his mouth curves around the face. But then if you turn his head to the side, you see that his mouth actually comes back up into a nice smile. For his eyes, I'm giving him kind of a furrowed eyebrow from the front view, but making sure that the shape of his eyes themselves stay rounded from the side for more of a softened gaze. And I think it might actually be working. So now I can safely start getting lost in all the little details, which, are kind of the same details that I sculpted in my last video making Frogbert. So I know what you might be thinking. Frogs and toads are essentially the same, and I just made a frog, so this video is going to be basically a repeat of the last one, right? Wrong! Frogs and toads are so different. For example, frogs are semi-aquatic and mostly found in the water, and toads would rather just sit on the shore and read their book. Also, toads are very lumpy, so let's have a lump montage. Okay, that's enough lumps. Now that he is sufficiently lumped, his lumps can get smoothed out, and once he's smoothed out, he can get lumped again. This texture roller that I made by repeatedly poking a corn dog of clay from my last video gives him a good overall pebbly texture. Then a bunch of tiny dots of clay blend the larger lumps in with the smaller ones. And finally, since he's one of the older residents of Dingley Dell, I get to add in his wrinkles and eye bags. This is actually the part of the sculpt I ended up being the most proud of. Looking back with Frogbert, I kind of just drew wrinkle lines on his face, but for this toad, I was really careful to think about the loose skin that creates those wrinkles and really sculpt the forms of it. He gets a quick bake in the oven, and I think this may be one of my best sculpts yet. Plus, I think the 2-expression face actually worked. Check this out. Hate, love. Hate, love. With his face complete, we can move on to Chapter 2, the armature, which is like the wire skeleton that's going to make this toad strong enough to support his own weight, but also posable enough to lay back down when that feels too exhausting. So if you've watched my videos wondering what kind of wires I use and why, just know I'm wondering the same thing, which is probably why my armatures keep breaking. So this time I'm opting for the less posable but also less fragile copper and annealed steel. First, the wires get cut roughly into the lengths of the spine, arm span, and leg span, then lashed together with thread to fuse their powers and bent to form shapes that in absolutely no way resemble a spine, arm span, or leg span. Those leg and arm wires get stuck onto the spine with a wrapping of thread, which holds it all in place just long enough to glue it together with super glue and baking soda, which then keeps all the joints from wiggling while I entomb them in epoxy putty. And then I use like a tube and a half of this stuff to bulk him out because he's built like a Coke can. Once that is so heavy there's no way he'll ever be able to stand up on his own, I cut the excess leg wires just to really make sure he can't run away. But I know how much you all love the sounds of hacksawing these interlocking brass tubes, so let's cut a couple to make mounts for the replaceable hands and feet. Now with excessive table shaking. Because we moved! I have now upgraded from a tiny corner in my living room to a whole room for working on Dingley Dell, a 1/4 garage for doing the Fumi stuff, Jake has a studio for making all the music for these videos, and I now have my own personal supply of sticks and dirt for crafting. There's a few kinks to work out, like my new studio is very dark, the garage table is on wheels so it shakes a lot, Jake's studio where I record all this voiceover is still kind of echoey, and we're renting so I'll have to return all of these sticks and dirt when we move out. All I'm saying is, bear with me a little here. Those get cleaned up with a file, and then I mix up some 2-part liquid epoxy to glue them in place on the wires. His neck also gets a little brass tube so that I can make his head removable for the aforementioned different expressions, or just in case there's any kind of revolution that goes down in Dingley Dell. Finally, because I apparently love torturing these small inanimate animals, and also because he's just way too heavy for such a little guy, I drill a bunch of holes into his epoxy ribs and hips so I can keep his shape but also make him lighter. And now we have a finished toad armature. Beautiful. So, as you're probably starting to see, it takes a lot of different skills to make a critter like this. Character design, sculpting, painting, sewing, wire work. Which is why I was so excited when Skillshare reached out to sponsor this video. Not only is it a great platform that offers classes on all of these topics, but also, if it wasn't for their Fundamentals of DSLR Photography class with Justin Bridges, I don't think I would have been able to make this channel. Because when I first started out making these critters and dioramas, I had no idea how to share them other than like grabbing random people off the street and forcing them into my apartment to look at my miniatures, which I think is kidnapping. And of course I tried to take pictures, but genuinely, this is how the photos turned out. I swear, these are real. This isn't even a bit for YouTube. But through taking this photography class on Skillshare, I was able to learn all the basics of working with my camera and the theory behind all of the tools, which resulted in me being able to take photos like this of the same diorama, something that actually matches my vision and shows all the hard work I put into my craft. And because of that, I finally had a way to share my work online. So seriously, check out Skillshare if you're wanting to learn a new hobby or skill from world-class creatives and professionals. And the first 500 people to use the link in the description or scan the QR code will receive a free 1-month trial of Skillshare. Plus, you can give Skillshare memberships to your friends and family. Get started today! Thank you again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get back to the craft by filling out this horrifying little toad skeleton with foam. First, the big gaps get filled in with filter foam guts to give him a base shape but keep him flexible. Then his biceps and thighs get some stiffer yoga mat foam bones to try and help convince the wires to bend at the right spots. And next he gets absolutely caked up with cushion foam until he becomes this abomination. This is where it gets fun because it's basically just sculpting again. I start with the rough shapes, trimming off all the corners to round him out. Then I can start hacking away to get his proportions to match his design. He's a rotund little guy, but I gotta be careful to leave room for his clothes to go on top of him and not make him more rotund than intended. I spend a little time smoothing out the harsh angles of his body, give him some shapely gams, and carve him a little butt. Will this be visible once I put pants on him? No. Okay, his body shape may be looking kind of like Frogbird's. No shoulders, skinny legs, tiny butt for aesthetic purposes only. But again, I assure you, frogs and toads are very different. For example, frogs have long, lean legs for leaping substantial distances, and toads hate cardio. After just a little bit more work on his butt, his foam is done. And besides looking extremely stubby, he's starting to look like a little toad. Now we can start my favorite part of the critter making process, painting. But rather than me describing any of the painting process that you clicked on this video to learn, let me tell you the story of this toad. It was a day like any other. Totalmeyer ate his same breakfast, did his same chores, and was walking the same path as always when he encountered the most awful music he had ever heard. It was as if 5 different bands had come together to play 5 different songs at the exact same time. Afraid that he may have to listen to even one more moment of it, or God forbid be forced into audience participation, he quickly tried to hurry away. But as he shot one last scornful look back at the source of the music, he happened to lock eyes with the band's washtub bassist, Frogbert Ribbiton, and found himself walking towards the source of the music instead. Of course, they had known each other as children. I mean, no one's a stranger in the village of Dingley Dell, but something was different about this frog. He was so chill. Like he could get run over by a lawnmower and not even blink an eye. Totalmeyer, who would be bothered by a too crunchy leaf under his foot, found this to be an incredibly intriguing quality. After sitting through another hour of the absolute worst music he had ever heard, he finally worked up the nerve to walk up to Frogbert and inform him that his band's poster was riddled with spelling and grammatical errors, as it was the best conversation starter he could think of. Impressed with Totalmeyer's ability to spell words like music and tonight, and mistaking him as the band's biggest fan, Frogbert told him of all of his big ideas for the band. Concerts, tours, farmers markets. Totalmeyer, excited for an excuse to spend time with Frogbert, and in possession of incredible abilities of executive functioning, offered to help. Now for Totalmeyer, every day was different. He was so busy attending town events, talking to other critters, walking different paths, occasionally even eating different foods. His life was suddenly so full, and he hated it. But in that way where hating things is actually kind of fun, and he was doing it all with Frogbert, so maybe it was even kind of nice? On the day that Frogbert's band suddenly broke up, Totalmeyer was heartbroken, thinking that with no more band, there'd be no more reason for Frogbert to want to spend time with him. So he went back home to his same breakfast and his same chores and no one to bother him. But it didn't quite feel the same anymore. As he walked his regular evening path, it dawned on him what that difference was. He was lonely. Despondent, he was about to turn around, go home, and read the saddest poetry he could find when he came upon Frogbert, waiting for him with a kiss, a picnic basket, and no projects to work on at all. Though, of course, the next day he did suggest they make an ice cream cart together. And they've been inseparable ever since. I love how this paint job turned out. Now he's just missing something. Limbs. To make the limbs posable, they're gonna need little wire armatures. For his hands, I start with 3 pieces of wire folded in half. They get wrapped together, and then 4 of the wires get splayed out to match the fingers. The 5th wire gets awkwardly cut off because this technique is really meant for hands with 5 fingers, and the 6th wire wraps around the rest to make a rough palm shape. The finger wires get trimmed down, and then the ends get looped over to make grabby little fingy tips. And to attach these hands to the arms, I'm using some more of this square brass tubing. This time I glue on tubes one size up so they can slide over the arm tubes. As always, I'm making 2 sets of hands, one for this toad and one for me to keep in my growing disembodied hand collection. Now for the feet, this is gonna be a little tougher due to my recent discovery that the legs are completely uneven. Whoever did this, you're fired. Okay, I rehired them, but we're gonna have to compensate a little. The feet start similarly to the hands, with 3 wires folded in half and wrapped together. Then I glued them into some brass tube, of which I make sure the tubes for the left leg were a bit longer to make up for my armature maker's mistake. From there, I stick the feet wires onto the toad's legs and bend them to make an ankle, quadruple checking that this isn't lopsided anymore. The toe wires get cut down to size, the ends get looped over to make bulbous little toe tips, and then I glue in a T-nut so that I can bolt him down into a diorama of his little bookmaking studio later with a screw and a wing nut. Now, to take these appendages from freaky and skeletal to gross and fleshy, I'm taking more of this cushion foam, saturating it with balloon latex, and just squishing a bunch of it around the wires. Then I trim off the excess to help him look a little less like a toad that unsuccessfully tried to cross a 5-lane highway. And now that I've cut all the excess foam off, it's time to add some more back on. Like beefing out his big, meaty Popeye forearms, adding some fleshiness to his palms and knuckles, making his toe tips nice and bulby, and adding heels on the back of his feet. And with that, they are nice and appendage-shaped and ready for their latex skin. I fill a jar with balloon latex, then add some brown and red acrylic paints to match the kind of caramel color I want for this toad. Then I just start by dunking one of these feet like it's a Puritan woman that's just been accused of witchcraft. I use my scribe tool to help scrape off any excess latex in its crevices and holes, then set it to dry. And the hands get the same treatment. And then I do this again and again, letting the latex dry before dunking the appendages in for another coat, just like I did for Frogbert. Okay, maybe frogs and toads are basically the same, and most of the process of this video will just feel like a repeat of the last one. But did people ever get tired of Bob Ross painting happy little trees, or John Wayne Gacy painting clowns? Dingley Dell needs a toad, and I'm the only person who can give it one. But there's one thing that toads have and frogs don't, and that's lobes. So I add them by taking my scribe tool and just dotting on little pinpricks of latex all over the hands and feet. I had to do this in a few passes to keep the wet latex dots from fusing together into huge latex blobs, building up all the bumps over time until the hands and feet matched the texture of his head. Once those bumps were dry, I could rip them off their drying sticks and do the very satisfying work of cutting off all the excess latex strips. And then I could do the extremely satisfying work of pulling the latex out of these screw holes. And I think they ultimately turned out pretty nice. The color isn't as consistent as I would like, but it always just makes me happy to see these feet be able to bend and pose like this. With his head, body, and limbs done, all that leaves now is his clothing. Oh, and speaking of clothing, I made shirts. Just a little something fun for all of you who like to wear shirts that make the people around you confused at best and concerned at worst. Also in kid sizes. Oh, and also I made stickers. But this toad wouldn't be caught dead in a t-shirt, so let's make him some real clothes. First, I make the sewing patterns for this toad the same way that I would for any human clothes, by draping the fabric and sticking the pins directly into their body. Then I cut that pattern out of his nice shirt fabric and put the shirt together with a little bit of sewing and a lot of glue. For all of you out there sewing outfits for an entire village of miniature animals, the number one thing you can do to improve your miniature sewing is let go of all of your scruples and just use glue. Then I sew the shirt directly onto his body to give him a really cool guy sleeveless button-up look. For his pants, I cut all the pieces out of this old jacket I thrifted because I don't know where to buy fabric anymore, then sew them together to make some cute tiny trousers. I iron them to make a pleat down the center, melt a huge hole in the front of them, rip that out, and sew a new one back in. Then I do all the finishing touches with glue, hemming the edge of his waistband and making him these adorable pants cuffs. Can't believe I used to actually sew these. And now I can begin to make his waistcoat. Or is it a vest? What's the difference? Is it just that one's British? Then I glue some fabric around two little paper rectangles to make pockets with, which, if they're anything like mine, hold really important stuff like used tissues, snack wrappers, and old receipts. And my favorite part of any garment, he got some adorable tiny buttons. These are so cute, I love them. They're a nightmare to sew on. The two halves then get sewn together and he's becoming a very dapper little guy. As cool as the sleeveless look is, I think he needs a jacket. These are always the hardest garments to make because there won't be any more garments to go on top of it to hide my mistakes. The trickiest part of these is always making the sleeves. I think there's some kind of mathematical equation for patterning them, but I didn't start making tiny posable animals because I enjoy doing math, so I kind of just wing it, and so far it's mostly worked. Please send your thoughts and prayers that math may never find me in this hobby. He gets more little buttons because I'll take any excuse I can find to use these, and the existence of buttons implies the existence of buttonholes, so I embroider some faux buttonholes into the other side of the coat. I don't know how buttonholey they really turned out, but I still like knowing they're there. So for his little fly tie, as I was making this, I realized I wasn't totally sure if toads even ate flies or if that was just like a frog thing. So I looked up what toads eat and... don't tell Miss Mouse. But anyway, here's a cute little fly tie. I initially thought he'd have a little pocket watch to keep himself on schedule, but I think nowadays he's so far off his schedule that he'd rather not be reminded, so I just gave him the pocket watch chain to keep up appearances. And finally, his glasses. Back when I was sculpting this toad's head, I actually snuck 2 magnets underneath the skin of his snout before baking the clay. So if I make the glasses frames from a magnetic wire, they, fingers crossed, should be able to stay on his face, but also be detachable. First, I cut off a bit of wire and bend it into a rough half-moon glasses shape, making sure the wire touches both magnets and slots through these 2 sets of bumps on his face to stay in place. Thanks to my patrons for helping me figure that out while I was crashing out over this. Then I traced and mirrored them on a piece of paper to get a pattern where both sides matched, and used that to bend a final piece of wire. Now, for the lenses. I cut out the negative shapes of the frames from this clear plastic sheet, but the real issue was how to attach them. Superglue fogs up clear plastic like this. I know because of this telescope lens with a secret message superglued inside. Very foggy. So I decided to try UV resin because I could really use another toxic adhesive in this video. I fill the gaps between the plastic and the wire with resin, then slather the whole rest of the lens to ensure an even coat. I hit the resin with this little UV flashlight for a few seconds, and it just became a hard plastic. I flip them over, do the other side, and this toad has little glasses. They turned out way better than I thought they would, and I love how they magnify what's behind them. This is really such a neat effect. And one more accessory we can't forget. Frogbert and Totalmeyer have now been engaged longer than they were ever dating, so he needs his engagement ring. With that, our toad is done, but before we get to the reveal, I've been observing the village of Dingley Dell for over a year now, and I feel like there's just something off about these critters. I can't quite put my finger on it. So I've decided to write down my observations, and what better way to start than with an incredibly detailed manuscript all about Totalmeyer, his body, fashion sense, and love life. Hopefully he'll like it and help me publish and distribute it to the entire village of Dingley Dell. So while I finish that up, I'd like to take a moment to say a big thank you to my partner Jakey, who makes all the music for these videos, Jane Chu for her editing assistance, and of course, my patrons over on Patreon. Especially my honorary Dingley Dellians, Brave Little Toaster, Jake, Figgy Starship, Sharkin Hats, Ian Howell, Windamore Atelier, Emma, Robert Harris, Cynthia Treen Studio Thread Follower, Wasatch Creations, Straight Up Sephiroth, Miss Murdy's Menagerie, Judy Lynn, Becky Krupitis, Anubix, Nariana Fritsch, Bonbon, Awkward Burb, Unamused 20, Lemonade Sparkle, Big Venus, Isaac Warner, and Fiona Bob. And my newest toothbrush donors, Zane, Sacklemore, Tildis, Jenny Ashton, Zane Fuller, E.C. Salisbury, November Ocean, Min Makes, Rollo Snail, Pickled Peepees, Gavo, Holy Order of the Swamp Eel, Pole, Yuzu, Miss Mephi Bosheth, Aaron S., Ralph, and El Green. Thank you so much for your support and your patience, especially through my move. I couldn't do this without you. And with my manuscript done, we're ready for the reveal. So, what do you think? Will you help me publish this book all about your body and love life for everyone in town to read? Is that a no?